All right, so it's 12:01, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's GitLab University. So we have Job presenting today. He'll be focusing on some of the awesome things that are coming in this next release or that are planned for this next release. So just a few housekeeping items before we jump into things. So one, this will be our last week using BlueJeans. I'll formally switch us over to Zoom next week. And then two, we're taking a new approach to how we think about these sales and product training. So what we're going to try and do is at the start of each release, Job will present what we together, sorry, my dog is reacting to someone knocking on the door. So ignore his whining in the background. But yeah, so at the start of each release, Job and I sort of chat, think about like what are the things that we're going to want to really push from a marketing and sales perspective. And so what we want to do is like these core focus areas, we want Job to really come in and present like what's this concept, this new product area that we might be opening ourselves into, and how do we think about how this is really going to help our audience solve a problem, sort of address like a key challenge that they've had, or just offer a new way of working in general. And so Job will present on like the high level concept to help us understand like why this is important, how it's going to affect a developer's workflow, and then also walk us through how this feature may look within GitLab. Again, we're talking about everything at a conceptual level because it's still very early in the release, but it'll still be good for us to have this foundational knowledge. And then the following week, I'll come in and present how we think about the marketing efforts and the messaging that we want to push from both a sales and marketing perspective. So let's give it a go for these next 2 weeks, and please do offer feedback so we can always get better at these sessions. With that, I will pass it over to Job, who will be talking about review apps, time tracking, and our upcoming Slack integration.
Thanks, Amara. I don't have anything to show you, and no slides, because we haven't made anything. And I had the slides from the product update, which just had the name of the thing in there, but you probably can guess. So I want to start talking about review apps first, because I think that's both the most complex thing to understand, but also one of the most powerful things we've ever done with GitLab. So the idea behind review apps is that whenever you submit a change, right, you make a merge request. You say, I want to add this change to my repository. And your repository is usually a product or a website or some application that you're building. Now, traditionally, what we do is you look at the code, you review it to see if it's good. And if you're happy with it, you accept the merge and it gets merged in the code. But at this point, the only thing you're seeing is the code itself. If you want to see the change in life, in action, you either have to pull the code to your local machine and run your local development environment there. Maybe you've done that for the website, which is kind of a pain because it takes a lot of work. You have to go outside of GitLab. Or you wait until it's deployed somewhere. Maybe it's deployed to production immediately. But in most cases, what organizations do is that to see upcoming changes, they set up some sort of a staging area where you can preview changes and see if the changes that were made recently, even though they went to code review, to see whether they break anything or they are working as expected. Now, for building an application that wants to put all of these things in once, where we say we want you to go from ID all the way to production, having to still wait for deploy to staging or to production, or having to still go to your local machine, that seems a very long step, and it's a very painful step. Now, we have CI, which has all these capabilities, one of which is to be able to deploy your application very easily to something like Kubernetes or to any environment. And what you've done, if you already are using GitLab, and you deploy from GitLab, you just have a script there that says, do this, this, and this, and then my application is deployed. And you've set that up, for instance, for your production environment and your staging environment. Now, what review apps allow you to do is to have dynamic environments. Basically, that means that whenever there's a merge request, for example, we automatically create a new environment and do the deploy there. So you have already all your deploy script set up for production or any other environment. So you already have all this information. Now, the only thing you have to do is say, okay, I want to use review apps. And then what GitLab will do is whenever you create a new merge request, it will deploy your application specifically for that merge request in a unique environment. It means that, very simply, if you are in the merge request, you click on a link and you see exactly how the application looks with that change, with the proposed change. An example. I want to add a new button to our website. I want it to be on the main page, big button, click here to buy GitLab. So traditionally, I would make a merge request. Someone would check the code, think if it's good. Maybe I would make a screenshot to show how it works. They would merge it and we would see it eventually in production. With review apps, I do the same steps. I make a merge request, but now whoever is reviewing it can click on a link that says, review this change. And you click on the link and you're brought to the exact website that is deployed identical to how we normally deploy, but now with my change there before it's merged. So we see the whole app running live, whatever it is that we're running, but with this particular change. And then whenever the merge request is done, whenever we merged it or we closed it because we don't want it, we automatically destroy that environment so that we don't have a server running all these live versions. So this is a very powerful way to quickly see what are the changes and whether they are working.
Real question here. How is that related to CI? Because passing the build and all that, is that just like a visual CI you could put it?
No. It's related to CI in the sense that to have this working, you have to have CI fully set up in the sense that you have to be able to deploy using CI. Of course, you can specifically do it for this purpose and still deploy through other means, but CI is the thing that will actually do the deploy for you. So whereas you define in CI how to do your test, but you also define, for instance, how to do your deploy, you define here that you want to use CI to do this. So you define in your .gitlab CI YAML file that you want to use review apps or dynamic environments.
Follow-up question, Yob, along the same lines as Phil's question, how does this relate to how we think about IDEs?
So an IDE is having this whole environment where you can write your code and then see the result live, right? That is like the ultimate way to do this. This comes very, very close. Whereas in an IDE, you typically run a development environment. Here, what you do is you actually deploy as if it's a production deploy. Maybe you only deploy to one server instead of many. Maybe you make some small changes, but the deploy in all other ways is identical to a normal deploy. So I would say this is if you have a timeline of IDE to production, this is past that point. You already made the change, and now we are looking to review it. In practice, what happens, of course, is very similar, right? You have some code that is changed, and you see the result, which is what you ideally have in an IDE as well. But in this case, this is available for everyone and for the people that are reviewing, and it's deploying in the same way. So I would say it's mostly a step later. And of course, this is not about editing the code. This is about reviewing. That's why we call it review apps.
I have a question as well about the, you said that with the review apps, it automatically creates a new environment. And then once you're done reviewing it, it automatically destroys that environment. What does that actually mean? Like what happens when this new environment is created? Yeah, I don't know much about that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So an environment is just a definition of where you want your app to be deployed. That means that if I have a number of servers available, I can say this server, for instance, and this is a simplified example, but this server is my production. So whenever I do a deploy to my environment named production, in that case, it will be actually live. That's the thing that I connected to the website. And maybe I have one for staging. This is a particular server. I call that staging. And GitLab does the exact same process, but it just says, well, if the environment is staging, then do your deploy on server Y instead of X. So GitLab sees that, it runs the script and says, okay, for this particular case, I have to deploy to that environment, which is at this particular address. Now, having dynamic environments, so with review apps, means that we say to GitLab, for instance, because you've linked your Kubernetes cluster, you can say, well, these are the resources that we have. Make use of these resources and create environments whenever you need them. So let's say I have 5 servers. That means that GitLab can just, if a server is available, create an environment. It just gives like a random name or based on the commit, and then deploy to one of those servers. And then we use that temporarily to be able to review the actual changes that were introduced in a merge request. This is getting very close to becoming a technical explanation of how it works. But what an environment is basically saying whether this is something that users are facing, saying this is something specifically for developers, for testing, or in this case, something for only this particular merge request. And saying that we're destroying it means that we're then freeing up the capacity to put something else there, or at least not wasting the resources that we are using. Because of course, if you deploy your application somewhere, that requires CPU time, that requires memory. So you don't want to keep that there forever. We want to be able to destroy that. And
yeah, okay.
That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you very much.
And to make clear, in 8.12, we released this experimentally, and we're not able to destroy the review apps yet. So if you use this feature in GitLab 8.12, which you could, you would be just creating all these environments until you don't have any resources anymore. And that's why we're saying we're releasing it in 8.13, because now we are destroying
it. Hey, Job, so when the environment's dynamically created, if you were, say, eventually want to deploy to production, would it be dynamically creating an environment which is exactly the same as the production environment that would eventually get deployed to? Is that what we're doing? So is it smart enough to know, to dynamically create an environment which is exactly the same thing as where it's eventually going to end up? Is that how it works?
Yeah, so the production environment you just defined, right? And I just shared a link in the chat, which Sid also shared with me, which is from Runnable, which is another company that does this specifically, that creates these review apps, so you get a good idea. But the way that you should think about these environments is that, yes, production is just another environment. It's just that production, we explicitly say, if it is production, then it is here. Whereas dynamic environments means that we can just make a new environment as we please with available resources. That is the fundamental difference. Another example, sometimes if you want to deploy to a certain place, you want to have the right credentials to that place. So what we do is we define for production, use these credentials, use this key to be able to enter that server. For this environment, use that key to enter that server. And with dynamic environments, we do that differently, of course.
It sounds pretty slick. I mean, as far as the competition or what else is out there, is this, I mean, it's new to me. So I mean, our developers, how will my developer friends react to it? Will it be like, wow, we've never heard this before? Or will they say, hey, we kind of do this already using this other thing?
Well, we don't see a lot of usage of this. It does exist. It's not a new idea. We know that people have been doing this by making it themselves here and there. Heroku, which is this service that you can easily host your web application, they've had it. Actually, Mark comes from there and worked on that, so it's one of the reasons why this came up. And for instance, the video that I shared is from Runnable, which is a company that just does this. There's several other companies that just offer this service. But in GitLab, we already had all these tools to make this happen. We already had the CI pipeline. If you're using GitLab, you're using CI, then you're only this little step away from having this feature. So having this ready and having to not configure anything if you already set up CI, that's a very big deal. And it's all integrated because it's all our own thing. So yes, it exists. It's not a new idea. It's not our invention at all, but we were in a really good position to build this.
Hey, Job, along the same lines, is the environment, is that all configurable by the developers, the testers? If somebody wants to test in a larger environment or suck up some more resources, can the tester actually indicate that they want to test in that type of environment rather than what the developer is suggesting?
Yeah, so this is all within your own control, right? The only real thing that GitLab does is it says, well, tell us what to do. That is basically what GitLab does. And GitLab says, tell us what to do in this specific file, which is this YAML file, this GitLab CI YAML file. So you write there what you want. You can say for specific environments that you want to do certain things. It's all up to you to define what eventually happens. Like from our side, we're not doing that much work, right? The only thing we're making work is that it's easy to find the different locations and we link them together. But the actual deploying and making use of your infrastructure is mostly in your hands. We just do some smart tricks to link it together.
Hey, Yob, I have another question. Oh, sorry, Hayden, go ahead. Just a quick question, really confirmation. So you talked about, how this is enabled because of the fact that we are an integrated product and we've done a lot of work in our CI offering. So just to confirm, for someone to be able to use review apps, they have to already be using GitLab CI.
Yes. So if you don't already have to be using it, you can start using it.
Yes,
for
in
this
conjunction
reason.
with.
Yeah, you have to use GitLab CI. That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to confirm. Thank you.
Hey, Yob, is this part of the Community Edition vision, or is this an EE's feature?
No, this is part of the Community Edition. It's very much, it's quite a simple feature on our side, and it's very fundamental, the changes that we made to the environment. It wouldn't be very interesting for us to limit this to EE. We are thinking about EE CI features, if that is the second question. But we have to find a good medium there yet.
Okay, no worries. And is it kind of a per project configurable? You turn this on in the project. So I'm just imagining a scenario where, like, let's take our website, for example. I remember in the early days when I got here, making changes to the website. I'm like, I wish I didn't really know Markdown that well, or the language we use to HTML to change the website. And I never actually figured out how to build it locally. It was kind of a pain to do that. And I'd end up just making a change and then looking at the website, half an hour later and realizing, didn't work, I have to change it. So this sounds really awesome for that sort of scenario. So that is a project on GitLab.com. And let's say we had review apps now. Would that be configurable in that project that any merge request would have a review apps tab or something that you could click on and it would build that change in a staging environment? Is that kind of...
No, your example is excellent. And it is per project because GitLab right now, GitLab CI, you configure per project. So yes. And this is an excellent change because we will do this for the website. It's even better than you suggested. Rather than doing it on demand, we'll do it in advance. So if you create a merge request, we'll start building the environment right away so that you can immediately check out what the change is there. Yeah, this is what we're going to do. And you can enable this per project.
Awesome. That sounds great.
It's an excellent example, and it will be very useful for the website.
Cool, thank you. Actually, just a quick follow-up question. I've been getting some questions from prospective customers about resource requirements for coding and GitLab CI, and I imagine this is going to add some load. Is that an area that we really have to tread lightly in terms of the resource requirements for doing this?
No, it is. So the way this works is just like anything else in GitLab CI. GitLab itself won't use any more extra resources than it does. Well, yeah, but immeasurably, unnoticeably a little more. What we'll be using is the servers that you configure. So if you have a Kubernetes cluster, we will deploy there, and whatever you deploy, it's your thing. So it just depends how much work it is, right? If you have a heavy app, it will take that much. But it's not so much that, GitLab is now heavier to use because this feature. No, not at all. It won't change that at all.
Yeah, I guess I was talking about the environments that we're provisioning with, things like coding and CI and now review apps. That's outside the realm of the GitLab application itself. And I think the questions that I'm getting seem to be around, once we sort of open up the you know, the ability for developers to spin up all these resources. You know, what are the? I guess people are just concerned about that. You know, do they have to put limitations on it? Do they have to consider, you know, expanding their resource pool and things like that? That's all.
That's actually a good question. We're getting into the technical realm right now, but basically anything that will call GitLab, like if you have a user, they go to GitLab and they perform a bunch of things. The machine that GitLab runs on has to perform computations. If a CI goes to GitLab and does things, the same thing happens. So yes, you need resources for that. Does GitLab need more resources if you make more use of CI? Yes, of course, because it does. It pulls repositories. It does requests to GitLab. For a company, and you know, if you're talking in a sales conversation, the argument is very easily made that they still only need one GitLab instance or a cluster of GitLab instances rather than 6 different applications that you have to scale individually. GitLab scales excellently. So yes, you do have to scale GitLab if you start to use more of servers that call GitLab, more CI services. But it's worth it because you only have to scale GitLab and not 6 applications. Amara, did you still have a question?
No, I think you answered most of them, at least that I had. I guess one last question, and I think you spoke to this already. I just want to, like, if you could quickly recap, like, the impact that you think this would have on a team. So you mentioned not a lot of people are doing this today, and I imagine it's due to either like the complexity or the challenges around like procuring another tool to do this for them. And so for the people who are, you know, are going to be excited to hear this, can you help us just understand like how this is really going to impact their workflow by the ability to be able to review their changes more easily now?
Yeah. So before review apps, if you want to do QA or you want to do some sort of a review of a change, you have to set up a server manually, or you have to make sure that you deploy to a certain environment, and you have to do quite some work, too much work, so that no one actually does that. With review apps, you have the ability to have this instantly on any merge request. So you're cutting away a huge amount of time, and you're actually giving the ability to do this early QA during code review to actually see the application running. You can even imagine doing this, for instance, if you have a QA process, a manual QA process, all the things that they had to do before the QA, setting up the whole application, that's all gone now. So there's a huge win in terms of time, and it's an enormous comfort thing, right? It's really nice especially if you're working on design or just to see if something works. Yeah, it's extremely good for that. Just manual testing. It's hard to describe what the hard differences will be, but it's for a developer. If you tell a developer that with every change that you have a live environment running the change, it's going to change their workflow a lot, because now they can just click around, and anyone can just click around. You want to make a suggestion for something, rather than making a mock-up or making changes locally and deploying them somewhere, just make a merge request, and people can see out your changes. We make a new website about GitLab.com. We can just throw in a merge request, and you have it right there. Everyone can check it out. Everyone in the whole company can just go to that link and see what the new website looks. Click around, find mistakes, make changes. It's super powerful.
Yeah, I'm excited. I think it's going to be, I mean, I'm mostly excited about the GitLab.com use cases, but I think you're absolutely right. The overhead that it sounds like it's removing will be really great. So it's exciting. There's no other questions, and I guess we can move into either time tracking or Slack, whichever one you want to take first.
Sure. I will start with Slack and chat ops and such, because we're more likely to ship that this month than the time tracking. So everyone here uses Slack. So I don't have to tell you how big of a deal this is. I would also like to remind you of how big of a deal Slack itself is, because everyone it has grown immensely over the past year, and everyone is talking about it, and people can't stop talking about it. It can be good and bad for your productivity, but everyone still uses it, and it's really nice. There has been several trends, one of which was actually, I don't know if they were the actual founding fathers of the concept, but GitHub was very early using what they called is chat ops, which is chat operations. And it's the ability to make changes to your server and to your infrastructure using chat. So rather than, let's say I need a new server, right? I want to deploy a new server somewhere. Rather than having to go to a control panel or to use some sort of API somewhere, I can just write a chat saying, procure a new server. And it will just reply to me, the chatbot, saying, oh, there's a new server here for you. It's a very powerful idea. It was started by GitHub. They use it very, very intensively. They made this little chatbot that helps them with that, and that is expandable. So we really like that idea of chat ops, and we think it's a very, very powerful idea that fits really well within the ID to production, because if you want to quickly do a deploy, for instance, and maybe your deploys are not automated or not automatically on every commit, it is a very powerful idea to not have to leave chat to do a deploy, right? If we're chatting together and we're in a channel and I say, oh, I want to see this new change, just typing like something like bang, deploy this to here and here, and it then happens, it removes so many thresholds and so many barriers. It's a very, very powerful thought. So that's one side of the coin. The other side of the coin is chat applications or chat bots, which is not always or only chat operation, chat ops. And that is having the ability to do anything from chat, right? So maybe you've used the GIF thing where if you do /GIF, you write something, you get this really funny GIF back from Slack. So those applications have been very powerful as well. And in the same vein, being able to do GitLab actions from there reduces the threshold a lot to go from an ideation phase to creating an issue on the issue tracker. So what we would like to achieve is, in the very beginning at least, is to be able to go quickly from that chat into GitLab and to reduce the threshold to do this. Meaning, let's say I have a conversation, we have a conversation about a new feature, and I want to now move this into an issue, so I can quickly go to an issue in GitLab. And all I have to type is something like exclamation point, issue, and then it would automatically take the past so many chat lines and make an issue of that in GitLab. This is a very powerful idea, and it helps reduce the threshold going from the ideation phase to GitLab, and helps completing that cycle of ID to production. This is a lot of information. Ask me questions.
That's pretty awesome, Job. Is an example, here's a good example. Mike Walsh had asked Ruben this morning what happens when a customer wants to buy now but start their subscription, say, next month. And Ruben said, just change the start date to be next month and they can buy now. And when the license goes out, it won't start until the start date that's encrypted into the file. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was worth adding to the handbook. So, and it was all there on Slack in the Zora channel. Could you do something like that from Slack, like make an update to a file?
Well, theoretically, you could do anything, right? It's just a matter of code. I think it's more about then creating an issue from your conversation that you can then take into GitLab. It's about going from that conversation into implementation. And the implementation you do in GitLab and the conversation you have in your chat application. And I should make clear that it's not so much our interest to specifically target Slack, right? We ship Mattermost with GitLab, which is an open source alternative that you can also run on your own server. And what we want to create is that anyone that uses any kind of these chat applications, as much as they support the same kind of format, can use this. It might be that we start with Slack simply because it's the most capable one, or it's the one that has the biggest impact right now. But our goal is that we support any kind of chat platform.
Got it. Thank you, mate.
So Yob, like you said, you talk through like a lot of like really awesome ideas. Can you give us an understanding of like where you think the team will focus first?
We're focusing first on just making it work. There's a lot of challenges here, both on the GitLab side as on the chat side, and how to actually implement these things. We're thinking about doing the very simplest thing, which is slash commands. So you type a slash, and in that case, you can say like slash issue, and then you give a title and, for instance, a description of the issue. And I have to add that we're probably starting with supporting MetaMost, and we'll only later do Slack. Thanks, Sid, for chatting me that sneakily.
So I'll ask a follow-up question similar to the one that Joe asked earlier. How do we think about like someone's ability to like configure this? Is this something that, you know, as we roll out like chat ops into GitLab, we will sort of control like the number of things that you can do and like what exactly you can reference? How do we think about the configurability?
Well, your question, it carries a lot of weight because it depends on what we are doing, right? The goal of chat ops, which is the first thing I talked about, is having a fully configurable thing where you can configure whatever you want it to be, because it has to do with your own infrastructure. And we always respected it a lot, having GitLab being installed on people's own servers. So that side of this whole story is all about configurability, configuring what happens, what you can do with your bot, and having support for that. We're seeing that doing that right now in a way that works for everybody is just really, really hard, but we want to go there eventually. The first steps that we're making, having these slash commands, bridging the gap between chat and GitLab, they won't be very configurable. They will work mostly out of the box. At least our goal is to have them fully working out of the box, right? And then in the future, we'll move towards more bots and having this configurability. So it's very much depends on which stage we are. What we want, our ultimate goal, is that what we can do is we can ship Omnibus that includes your chatbot, and that the chatbot is already smart enough to do some things, and it's all connected automagically, so as we say. That is the ultimate goal, because right now setting up a chatbot is very, very hard. The first steps we're taking is just something very, very simple.
So I will ask another question. So again, I'm going to just keep honing in on this question of understanding impact. So I know that this is going to vary by a number of different use cases, but if you could just help us understand, like even as you think about like the work that you do on the product team, how would this impact your team, or like just the way that we even work at GitLab?
Yeah, so for instance, how we work at GitLab, I am always extremely bullish about people creating issues. Create issues. You have an idea, create an issue. You'll always hear me say it. If you haven't heard me say it, you haven't just not worked for a long time at GitLab. And why do I have to say that? Like it's because there's a small but noticeable threshold to going from just chatting, even though you type just as many characters, from chatting to Slack, where you are comfortable with your GIFs, to going to GitLab, which, by the way, also supports GIFs, but that's besides the point. Removing that threshold is a very big deal, making it easier to go from a random ID to an implementation, to make it easier to go from a complaint to something that you have on a system that tracks everything. That's very powerful. There's a few other things, right? Very simple things like seeing whether there are changes or checking like the status of CI. Those are things that are almost arbitrary for us to implement. Yet, if you are in chat and you just say status of CI or status of master, and this happens in our development channel all the time, and then you get an immediate reply giving you from GitLab the status, it means you don't have to go to GitLab. And we made it a good application, right? It's not hard to find that. But if you are already in chat with your colleagues and you just have to type that, or you just want to reference a file, or you just want to get an output, like the last few lines of CI, that's very powerful. It just makes your life much, much easier.
Yeah, I think the threshold example is very good. I was laughing and I'm happy I was on mute, but I think it's a really good point. Like honestly, even though you're right, the barrier is not that big, but there's something about like just chatting. And I think to your point, like there's a phenomenon around Slack that has really taken foothold. And I think a lot of it is just that, it's just such a natural behavior. And so I think the ability to just very easily go from something that's become so natural and inherent in the way you work into GitLab is amazing.
I would like to add that, when we are talking about this, there's a lot of things where I said, well, we'll see what we can do. That has to do, of course, also where we are in the milestone, right? We're very much in the beginning of the month. Near the end of the month, I can tell you, oh, this is what it's going to do. But right now, we're very much still exploring mostly like the technical side, and then we'll look into what abilities we will want to give to these things.
Awesome. Well, if there's no other questions, we can move on to the last thing, time tracking.
Sure. So what we're trying to do with GitLab is to make a complete package. And of course, there will always be external applications that one might use. We want to reduce that amount as much as possible. And in time, we want to be able to offer you something that replaces all your external tools, right? That's the whole philosophy of what we do. It's much better if everything is in the same package. The large enterprises that we target with GitLab Enterprise Edition, they use a lot of contractors. Maybe you've been one of those yourself. Especially in engineering, you see that there are many contractors that go from big company to another big company, and they work on big contracts. I know that, for instance, Stan has been a contractor at Google. What happens is that these contractors, they have to check their time. This is a very common thing. And if they have to check their time, they have to do that in some system. But it's, of course, an external system because the likes of Bitbucket and GitHub don't offer such a thing, even though the actual work is done there. So typically what happens is that people use Jira, which has this ability. But if they don't use Jira, they use some alternative system. So what we want to do is we have the power, because it's quite simple for us to implement, to have both the reporting of your usage of time and the time that is allocated for any kind of project or issue, in GitLab terms issue. We want to give you the power to do the time tracking there. So whether you are a contractor and you have to keep an actual track of how you spend your time and where you spend your time, or whether certain issues or certain projects have allocated a certain amount of time, we want to give you the ability to do that all within GitLab and to manage that there.
I think this is great for companies that have external contractors. They can really hone in on, they can basically hone in on their billing. And the fact that we have external users in GitLab makes that story really good. Have time tracking external users. Good story around contractors.
This is a very competitive landscape. There are many time tracking applications, and they have a lot of features. So what we're going to do in GitLab is we're going to do it at the very simplest possible way, as we do everything. And then we hope to sell this or give this away for a little while to customers that are interested in this, and then improve the experience based on the feedback we get, because we know this is a very competitive thing to be in, but we also know that this is something people actually use. So the way that we implement it right now is with what we call slash commands. So if you're in a comment in GitLab, you can type a slash and you can do magic. And that has been there for a while. You can change the signing and you can change the milestone. And we built time tracking, or we're building it such that you just use this. So if you're in a comment and you want to change the estimate, or you want to change the amount of time that you spend, you just type slash and then spend so much time, or slash estimate should add 1 hour, 1 day, and then it will be automatically logged in the issue itself.
A couple questions. So will there be an overall reporting dashboard for the time analytics, kind of like the cycle analytics?
Eventually, we might build that. In the very first iteration, we won't. It will just report per issue what the time spent and what the estimate is. If we see that there's demand for such a thing, of course, it's the first thing we thought about was reporting, but we want to build this step by step. So we're not building something people don't actually need, whether it is a dashboard or reporting.
And then ultimately it might get integrated with the Kanban board if there's a need there.
Oh, for sure, it will be integrated with the issue board, right? Yeah, it makes total sense to do it there. We'll just need to see whether there's an actual need for us to do that, because adding a change like that to the issue board increases the complexity of building and expanding the issue board. So we only want to do that if there's actually demand to do that.
Got it.
So, does the time tracking, it sounds like it will be used to set an estimate for the time spent, and then does it also track the actual time spent? So it kind of like, is it like a running clock that say, okay, I think it's going to take me 2 hours to do this, and then once I start working on it, the clock starts, and then I see how the reality matches up with what my estimate was?
The clock doesn't start. It's for you. You just have to report how much time you spent. Having an actual clock in there is not a very realistic way of how people work, right? You would have to start and pause it all the time in every single coffee break you take. So it's better to just report that manually. It's easier for everyone, and it's actually more friendly in terms of usability. I know that, what's the name? There's this big time tracking app, Harvest. They have this feature on the phone. I used to have a colleague that used this very intensively, and it's a nice detail, but it's very much something we don't need for first iteration. I doubt whether many people would actually use that.
So, Yob, you talked about sort of that this isn't a competitive landscape. And if I'm remembering correctly, even when we did the issue board webcast like 2 releases ago, someone asked about time tracking as well. And so maybe can you help us understand, like, not necessarily naming competitors, but just when you say time tracking to someone, what are they really thinking of in their head?
That's a really good question. What do they think of when you say time tracking? Well, what I think of is these external, exactly as Hayden was saying, right? It's this external contractors having either a certain estimate for the amount of time that they spend on certain issues or certain things, or just in general on the time that they have. They get an estimate and then they report back how much of that time they actually spent on that project. About the competitive landscape, as I said, the competitors are things like Jira and Harvest, and there's various programs that do this in all sorts of different ways.
Thanks, and sorry, that was a hard question, but I really did just want to get an understanding of, like, okay, if I said this to someone, what would they be thinking that I was referring to? So that's useful.
Mara, a lot of times that data that they would gather in a time tracking system will tie back into their back office for something like a project accounting, to where they want to be able to bill their customers for the amount of time that a particular person spent on a project, or at least account internally for how much people's time they're spent on things, so they know where their people costs are.
Thanks, Michael.
This is Joan. My history of that process is also for tracking, for accounting for capitalized projects too. So hopefully, eventually, I worked with our technology and finance team to build this in a project management system within the HR system, so that we could pull all timekeeping together. People could track their time off versus their time on each project. That project time went to the GL and went to accounting to separate out, as we were saying, to bill specific projects, but also to account for, what time was capitalized and how that could be accounted for. This is a really powerful tool and a really neat integration with your product.
Thanks, Joan. I have to say that, and this goes for everything, right? I always say that you should make an issue if you have an idea or you see something to change about GitLab, but especially about these kind of features. If you have experience with something similar, right? Because we're trying to replace product categories, basically. If you have experience and you know something about it, it's always a good idea to speak to me or to go to the issue where we are implementing time tracking. If you can't find it, I can give to you, but it's on the direction page, so you should be able to find it. And just share your experience and share your thoughts and look at how we are planning to integrate it and whether it matches what you would expect and what your experience is. Of course, we are always trying to ship the smallest possible thing and then learn from the feedback we get. But your feedback is the kind of feedback that we're waiting for if you have experience with this. So I would love it, Joan, and Michael, if you have ideas about this, have a look at the proposal, have a look at the implementation, and leave your feedback there. And even though it might not influence the first iteration, it will certainly help with following iterations of the product.
Be happy to do that. I never thought I would be able to give input on how we use GitLab, but I think that's awesome. And I did have a pretty sizable project, so if you'll send me the link to the issue, I'm happy to add my 2 cents.
I will do it right now.
So I have one final question. So thanks everyone for chiming in. I feel like I definitely understand the use case of external contributors, and to me, I really think that's beneficial to almost like administrators of a project or really like a management level. And so I'm kind of curious: is there a developer specific use case that we should keep in mind as well? I mean, obviously they could use this additionally, but I don't know, anything to add there?
You mean using time tracker as a developer?
Yeah. Like if we're not thinking go ahead.
It's really common for developers to work as external contractors and just have to track their time. So that's how I see it. This first iteration will be quite simple, right? The reporting tools won't be there. It will be just per issue. But it's a good start and it's already usable.
Awesome. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you, Job. This was amazing. I think it's always really helpful to have the same sort of contextual understanding of, what we're planning for the release. So thanks for really taking us through everything. So again, as I mentioned, what we'll do is in next week's GitLab University, I'll recap a lot of the things that Job shared here. I'll pull them into slides, then we'll talk about, how we're actually thinking about marketing, and how this like fits into the way that we want to start talking about GitLab use cases as well. And then I would love to hear feedback on, how you guys feel about having different sessions around just the sort of technical product training, and then on the other side, sort of the sales and marketing training. But thanks everyone for the time, and the recording should be available shortly.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amara. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, Job. Thank you, Amara.